Hello, listeners, and thanks for tuning in to the 100th episode of Master English with Tim, the podcast where Tim teaches you English in depth and detail and without ever hurrying. I'm Tim, native speaker English teacher from the United States, English teacher for 19 years, polyglot, world traveler, and podcaster now for 100 episodes. This is a really big deal for me. I guess when I started podcasting in 2023, it was pretty clear that I was going to keep going every week. And following that logic, it's easy to conclude and understand that I would one day reach 100 episodes. However, I didn't start thinking concretely about the 100 episode mark until a few months ago when my episode count reached in the 70s and then the 80s. And it's hard to believe that I've made it this far to episode 100. So thanks so much, everyone, for listening to me and supporting me. It means the world to me. So what will I do in this 100th episode? Well, I'm going to talk about one of my all-time favorite topics in teaching English, which is modern English words that have a very ancient origin in a language that was first spoken around 6,500 years ago in what is now southern Ukraine. That prehistoric language is called Proto-Indo-European, and over thousands of years, its daughter and granddaughter and great-granddaughter languages developed into languages which are still spoken today. For example, Latin languages like Spanish, Germanic ones like German and English, Slavic ones like Czech and Russian, Indic ones like Hindi and Bangla, and also Farsi, also known as Persian, and Greek. And sometimes we can even find a single root of a word which was part of Proto-Indo-European and that is still used in a lot of modern languages. In fact, that's what we will do in today's episode. We will focus on one Proto-Indo-European root that has given us a pretty large number of English words. Now, maybe you were wondering what that strange sound was that you heard at the beginning of the episode. Well, before I answer that question, let me first ask a different question. What do they call that sound in some different languages? In just a second, I will let you listen to people saying the name for this sound in different languages, different Proto-Indo-European languages, Indo-European languages. In just a second, I will let you listen to people saying the name for this sound in different languages. For each language, you will hear a person say a word which names the sound that you heard, and each time someone reads that word, there will be a pause. During the pause, you need to let the word repeat in your mind. This is the mental replay technique that I talked about in episode 47. I also want you to pay special attention to the beginning part of the word when you listen. Well, here's the word for that sound in Greek.
Gracunia. Gracunia. Gracunia.
Now, here is the word for the sound that you heard at the beginning of the episode in French. Now, if you're a French speaker, please tolerate my accent a little bit. Here's the word in French. Gratter. 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 Here it is in German. Also tolerate, please, my English or American accent in German. Kratzen. 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 Okay, and here it is in Hindi.
Kharunchna. Kharunchna. Kharunchna.
Okay, and here it is in Russian.
Скрести. Скрести. Скрести.
Okay, and here is the word in Farsi or Persian.
Хорош. Хорош. Хорош.
And here it is in the last language we'll do. It's English. Scratch. 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 So, maybe you noticed that the beginning part of all of those words that I and some other people, and also Google, read out loud, they all sound kind of similar to each other. They all started with something like kr or gr or skr. And so, like I said earlier in the episode, that similarity between words from different languages is not an accident. All of these words come from languages that are all actually related to each other. Distantly related, but still related. So, for the rest of this episode, I'm going to focus on words that are similar in sound and meaning to the word scratch. All of the words in this week's episode contain the root skra, which is connected with scratching. In case you don't remember what scratch means, let me explain. If you scratch something, you take something that is a bit sharp, for example, your fingernails, and you push that sharp thing against another object and then move it along the object. So, for example, dogs like it when people scratch them behind their ears. And when people don't understand something that's complicated, they might scratch their heads. So again, the meaning of scratch is the base meaning of the skra root. Sometimes the root skra appears in modified form in different words. 3 different kinds of changes can happen to the skra root, and you already heard these changes in those foreign words from the beginning of the episode. So the first change that can happen is that sometimes the s at the beginning disappears and leaves us with just kr. Sometimes the k sound becomes voiced and it turns into gra. And the last thing that can happen to the skra root is that different sounds can be added into it between the 3 individual sounds that make it up. For example, you'll hear one word where the root skra becomes score. Okay, now we are ready to start talking about the different words with the skra root. Actually, I said just a second ago that 3 things can happen to the skra root, but in fact, there is a 4th one. It can take on a meaning that is next to the original meaning. In other words, the meaning won't exactly be about scratching, but it will be about a category that is kind of similar to scratching. Words with the skra root have meanings that are in 4 different categories. Let's now start for real with our first category of those meanings, which is just the base meaning of scratch. We have 5 words in this category. The first such word is score. That's written S-C-O-R-E. You've probably heard this word in connection with sports. A score is a record of how many points each team in a competition has earned. For example, the final score in a basketball game might be, 103 to 96. So what's the connection between score and scratch? Well, nowadays, we have big electronic boards that show how many points each team has earned. But way back in the past, they of course didn't have those big electronic boards, and they remembered how many points each team had scored by scratching parallel lines onto a piece of wood using a knife or a sharp piece of rock. So the original meaning of score is not about games and sports and so on, it's just about scratching something in a particular way. If you scratch something, you make small cuts on its surface that are not very deep. And those small, not very deep cuts may or may not be parallel to each other. However, when you score something, you make cuts that are deep and parallel to each other on a surface. Well, more or less parallel. Another place where you can see scoring of this type is in geology. So many thousands of years ago, thousands of square kilometers of our Earth were covered in ice, especially the northern parts of the planet. Even though this ice must have weighed millions of tons, it still moved slowly over the land that was underneath it. As these huge layers of ice moved over the surface of the Earth, they carried rocks and sand with them and made deep scratches in the dirt and rock that was below them. And today, many thousands of years later, with all of the ice melted and the land underneath easily visible, we can see the deep parallel cuts that the ice made. So yes, the ground was scored by the ice. There are other situations where scoring can happen. For example, if you have a car and you live near a beach, the sand from the beach can get into some of the car's mechanisms or moving parts and make deep scratches in them, or score them. Let's look at another type of scratching. Let's talk about our second word, which is the verb scrape. When you scrape something, you remove something from its surface by scratching it. For instance, maybe you went driving on a nice summer day, and while you were driving, your car hit and killed a lot of insects. All those disgusting dead insects are now glued to your car's front window. You don't want the dead insects to stay there, so you remove them by scratching. You scrape the dead insects from the front window. Or maybe you bought a new house. You really love the house, but you hate the red paint on the outside, so you decide to scrape the paint off the house. Or maybe you decided to make some toast for breakfast, but you burnt it. But that's not such a big problem. All you need to do is take a knife and scrape the black parts off of the toast. Problem solved. By the way, we have a type of building that is so tall that it scrapes or scratches the sky. Usually these buildings are 150 meters tall or higher, and they are called skyscrapers. I think right now the tallest skyscraper in the world is the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, which scrapes the sky at 828 meters tall. That's so tall that they might need a new word, space scraper. Okay, that's not a real word, that's just my word. Any case, let's come back to the word scrape itself for a second. So scrape, obviously, is a verb, but we have a noun that comes from it. That noun is our third word, and it is scrap. A scrap is a small piece of material that has been removed from something by scraping. So those little pieces of black burnt bread that you removed from your toast, those little things are scraps. And the ugly red paint that you scratched off of your new house, those are also scraps. And more generally, scraps can be the less desirable leftover parts of something, especially food. So you could feed scraps from your table to your pet dog. Or birds might fight over scraps of a dead animal that is lying on the side of a road. Let's move on to our fourth word, which is a verb. This word is graze. That's spelled Graze. This word doesn't sound so much like scratch, but it still is related. Its root just has two changes from scratch. So let's take the scr root and throw away the s. Now we have cr. Now let's take the unvoiced k sound at the beginning of cr and change the k into a voiced g. So before we had cr, and now we have gr. And gr is the form of scr that we find in the word graze. So what does it mean if something grazes you? It means that it moves over the surface of your skin, kind of parallel to it, doing only minor damage, even though it could have been much worse, much more dangerous. For example, if a bullet from a gun grazes someone, it touches the surface of a person's skin and then flies away without entering the body. So if someone is grazed by a bullet, then that person is really lucky to be alive. Also, if you're walking through a forest and some branches scratch you just slightly, then also you can say that the branches grazed your skin. Let's move on to a noun with the gr version of the scr root. This word will be our fifth and last word from the category that is connected purely to scratching. This noun is grit, which is spelled Grit. Grit is any kind of material made up of many small, scratchy pieces. So if you go to a really nice beach and the sand there is really soft and nice to walk on, then that's not grit. Grit is more like scratchy sand, with each piece of sand a few millimeters across, and maybe some little pieces of broken seashells, and maybe some dirt, and maybe also some of that nicer soft sand made of very small pieces mixed into the mix. The main thing to remember here is that grit is scratchy sand or scratchy dirt of the kind that you find sometimes on the side of the road. So again, grit. Okay, we are ready for our next category, one which is still very close to the base meaning of scratching. This category is cleaning by scratching, and it has two verbs in it. The first one is scrub. That's S-C-R-U-B. If you scrub something, you clean it by pushing hard against it, by using a lot of force to rub it, often with something scratchy. So if you have a metal pan that you fried a lot of oily food in, and the pan has oil and burned food on it, you would probably need to scrub the pan to make it completely clean again. You'd probably scrub it with some kind of brush or maybe a very scratchy sponge. Another situation where you would need to scrub would be if you worked as a car mechanic. Your hands would have a lot of dirty oil on them, and to make your hands look a bit more respectable, you would need to scrub them with soap and maybe your fingernails, especially if you're going to go to a wedding. One thing that would help you scrub your hands would be some soap that has grit in it. There's one brand of soap in the United States that I know of that contains grit, and it's called Lava. I used lava sometimes when I was a bicycle mechanic and had really dirty hands. And believe me, that grit really did help clean my hands. It really did help me to scrub my hands clean. Okay, our second and last word with scrub, which is about cleaning, is scour. That's S-C-O-U-R. If you scour something, you also clean it with something scratchy, but this time with even more pressure and with something really scratchy, like a metal brush. So if you have a pan with a bunch of oil and food that's really burned onto it, and scrubbing didn't give you the result that you wanted, then maybe you need to scour the pan with a metal brush. If you really scour the pan, though, you will probably also leave some lines on it where you scratched it deeply. In other words, if you really scour a pan, you risk scoring it. Another meaning of scour is to make a great effort searching for something that you really want to find. So, for example, if you have a flight tomorrow afternoon to another country and can't find your passport, you probably will scour your house from top to bottom for your passport. Okay, that's all the words with this root that are used to talk about different variations of scratching to clean. Let's move on to the next category of meaning that is connected with our star root scra. That category is writing. So the first word in this next category is not actually a word, but instead an expression. The expression is chicken scratch. Chicken scratch is just a person's really, really bad and hard to read handwriting. I don't know about where you live, but in the United States, doctors are known for having really awful chicken scratch. And honestly, when I was a kid, my teachers sometimes complained that what I had written on my paper was utter chicken scratch, and they asked me to write it again. How about you? Do you have neat, easy-to-read handwriting, or do you have chicken scratch? Actually, we have a couple more words that contain scra that are related to writing by hand, and specifically about hard-to-read handwriting. And so our second word is scribble. That's written S-C-R-I-B-B-L-E. If you scribble something, you write it by hand, usually very quickly, and in a way that is difficult, if not impossible, to read, except maybe for the person who wrote it. So you might listen to a lecture at university and scribble down notes as you listen, but you might want to try to read your notes again not long after writing them, because if you scribbled them and you read them a week or two after the lecture, you might not understand what you wrote. Our third word related to writing, and specifically to hard-to-read or unreadable handwriting, is scrawl. That's written S-C-R-A-W-L. If you scrawl something, for example, if you scrawl your signature, it means that you write with your hand and arm too relaxed, with the result that what you write is too wide, it's too long. If you go inside of an old building that has been abandoned and there's trash everywhere inside, broken furniture and so on, you can maybe also see some writing on the walls. You can see where people scrawled their names on the walls. I guess one reason that people scrawl things on walls or on paper is that they're drunk. One kind of writing or drawing that may be done badly or beautifully is graffiti, which is also our fourth word in this category. Graffiti is drawing or writing that is made by artists or vandals, depending on how you look at it, on the sides of buildings and bridges and so on. I mentioned earlier the example of how someone might scrawl their own name on the wall of an abandoned building. That scrawling is an example of some really poor quality graffiti. In some cities, though, you can find some pretty impressive graffiti, and the artist Banksy is known for putting up graffiti in unexpected places around cities like London, Paris, and New York. Okay, there is one more word in English that contains a very modified version of the root scra, and which has to do with writing. That word is actually just write, which is our fifth and last word in this category. The obvious question about the word write is, well, if this is the root scra, then where is the ka and where is the sa? Well, let me answer that in just a second. But first, let me remind you that writing was often done in the very distant past by scratching something. To write something on stone, you definitely needed to scratch that stone with another stone or maybe a piece of bone. So yes, writing and scratching generally are similar to each other, or at least they were similar to each other in the distant past. So let's come back to our question about the root skra and how it turned into just ra, like in the word right. Well, to make a long story very short, the sa and the ka just disappeared and left us with the ra sound at the beginning of the word right. The last category of meaning for this week's episode for our root skra is using your hand to quickly take something. We have 4 words in this category. So imagine it's a burning hot day and you've been out walking in the sun for the past several hours and have had nothing to drink. And now imagine that you're coming into your house and someone hands you a cold drink. You won't just take the drink, you'll grab it right away. So how is grab connected with scratching? Well, think of the movement that your fingers make when you grab something. At first, your fingers are long, pointing out, and when you close your fingers, they kind of make a brief scratching motion. Now, this connection is not one that's completely certain, and it could be a coincidence. The meanings of scratch and grab are not that similar, and I wouldn't bet my life on there being a shared origin, but it could be true. A word that is related to grab is our second word in this category, which is grip. If you grip something, that's G-R-I-P, if you grip something, you already have it in your hand and you squeeze it strongly and don't let it go. So if you're driving home on a dark, windy, rainy night when the traffic is very heavy, then you will grip the steering wheel of your car very tightly. Also, if you're a business person, then you surely have met people who have different strengths of handshake. Some people hold your hand in theirs very weakly, while others grip so hard that it hurts. Grip also has a similar sounding synonym, and that is our third word, grasp, G-R-A-S-P. Grasp really means exactly the same thing as grip, so grasp your steering wheel or grasp someone's hand, and so on. Now, since I'm talking about gripping or grasping things so hard that it hurts, it will be a good time to talk about our last word of this category and this episode. That word is grief. That's written G-R-I-E-F, grief. Grief is the deep sadness a person has when they lose a person who is very close to them. What relationship is there between gripping something in your hand and sadness that comes after a person's death? Well, when we lose a person, our sadness is deepest when we still try to hold them close and don't accept that they're gone. Okay, that's our last word for this category. Grief is, of course, a very sad word, and it's kind of sad to end an episode with it. But please, don't feel any grief. I'll be back next Monday, just like always, for my 101st episode. Thank you everyone so much for listening, and see you all very soon.